My mother told the receptionist I was just there to drop off paperwork. 22 years as a trauma surgeon, and she still couldn't bring herself to say the word doctor in front of someone who mattered to her. She kept her hand on my brother's shoulder, steering him toward the check-in desk like he was the one who'd spent the night putting a man's chest back together. "I'm just the file girl," she said, laughing that bright country club laugh she saves for strangers. "My daughter does scheduling. Sweet girl, but not exactly the smart one." The nurse behind the desk did a double take. Her eyes went from my mother's face to my badge clipped to my blazer, and I watched the exact moment the photo registered against the name. She set down her clipboard. She didn't say anything right away. She just picked up the phone on the desk and said, very calmly, "Dr. Voss is here. Can someone page Dr. Reyes and let him know she's on site early?" My mother stopped laughing. But before I tell you what happened in that hospital lobby, and what it cost my family before the sun went down that day, you need to understand that this wasn't the first time. This had been happening for 22 years, in 100 rooms just like that one, and I let it happen every single time. Hit subscribe if you've ever sat quietly while someone you loved made you smaller than you are, because the woman I used to be is about to disappear, and what replaces her is not going to apologize for it. I grew up in a split-level house outside Tulsa, with a mother who measured love in trophies and a father who left when I was 7, which meant my mother only had one parenting philosophy left standing: whatever made her look good at church on Sunday. My brother Caleb was 18 months younger than me and built exactly the way she needed a son to be built. Easy smile, decent at baseball, never asked hard questions. I was the one who read 3 grades ahead, who fixed the garbage disposal at age 11 because nobody else would, who came home from the 8th grade science fair with a blue ribbon for a working water filtration model built out of sand, charcoal, and a 2-liter bottle. My mother put the ribbon in a kitchen drawer. She put Caleb's 3rd-place soccer trophy on the mantle, where the ladies from her Bible study could see it when they came over for coffee. I want to be fair to her, because that's the kind of thing you're supposed to say. But fair would mean pretending I don't remember exactly how her face changed when the school called to tell her I'd been accepted into a magnet science program 2 towns over, full ride, no cost to her at all. She read the letter standing at the stove, didn't look up, and said, "I hope you're not going to turn into one of those women who never gets married because she's too busy being smart." Then she went back to stirring the pot. I was 14. I folded that letter into quarters and put it in my backpack and didn't say another word about it at dinner. My father died of a heart attack the summer I turned 16, 2 states away, in an apartment with a woman none of us had ever met. My mother made me handle the arrangements because, in her words, "You're better at the paperwork stuff than I am, and somebody has to be the strong one." I was 16 years old negotiating with a funeral home in Missouri over a casket upcharge while my mother sat in the car because she said the office made her feel sick. Caleb stayed home. Nobody asked him to do anything. Nobody ever asked Caleb to do anything. When I got into the accelerated pre-med track at the University of Oklahoma at 18, full academic scholarship, the kind of acceptance letter that other parents frame, my mother read it over my shoulder while filing her nails and said, "Well, I guess somebody's going to be busy for the next 8 years instead of giving me grandkids." Caleb, 17, sprawled on the couch with a controller in his hands, snorted without looking up from the TV. "Bet she drops out by sophomore year," he said. Nobody corrected him. Nobody ever corrected him. I didn't drop out. I made a decision instead, the kind you don't realize you've made until you're 40 and looking back at the wreckage of it. I decided I would be useful instead of seen. I would shrink myself down to the size of what was convenient for everyone else, and I would pay for the privilege of being tolerated. Because somewhere in my hollowed-out teenage chest, I had convinced myself that being needed was close enough to being loved that I shouldn't ask for more. I worked nights at a diner through undergrad. I took out loans nobody co-signed because nobody offered to. I got into medical school on a combination of scholarships and sheer bloody-minded stubbornness. And through every single one of those years, my mother told people at church that I was still in school, figuring things out, like I was some 30-year-old taking basket weaving classes at the community college instead of doing rotations in a level 1 trauma center 60 hours a week. By the time I finished my surgical residency, I was 29 years old, and I had assisted in more emergency thoracotomies than most surgeons see in a career. Because the program I trained in took the worst trauma cases in 3 counties. I learned to work with my hands shaking from exhaustion and make them stop shaking the second I picked up a scalpel. I learned what it sounds like when a chest cavity fills with blood faster than you can suction it. And I learned how to stay calm anyway, 'cause panic kills patients and calm sometimes doesn't. None of that meant anything at my mother's dinner table. At my mother's dinner table, I was still the one who does the scheduling at the hospital. A phrase she'd landed on sometime in my residency and never updated, the way you'd keep calling a grown man tiny because that's what he was at 6 months old. Caleb, meanwhile, had become a wealth consultant, a title he'd given himself after 2 failed attempts at selling insurance and 1 semester of an online business certificate he never finished. He worked out of a co-working space downtown that I paid the membership fee for, though he didn't know that. I'd set it up as an automatic transfer years earlier, back when he was between opportunities, and my mother called me crying about how he might lose his apartment. I covered that too. And the car payment after that. And the credit card he ran up taking a girl to Cabo to impress her, a relationship that lasted 4 months after the trip. I want you to understand the scale of it, because the number still doesn't sound real to me even now. Over 14 years, between Caleb's business expenses, my mother's mortgage refinance after she fell behind, the roof she needed replaced, the used Lexus she insisted on because her sister-in-law had one, and the medical bills from my father's side of the family that somehow always ended up routed to me, I sent my family $290,000. Money I earned doing 26-hour shifts, money I earned standing over open chests at 3 in the morning, making decisions that meant the difference between somebody's father going home and somebody's father not going home. I never told them the real number on my paychecks. I let them believe hospital staff make modest, forgettable salaries because somewhere along the way, it had become easier to be underestimated than to be resented. The breaking point built slowly, the way a hairline fracture does, invisible until suddenly it isn't. It started at Caleb's engagement dinner 18 months ago. He stood up at the head of the table in a blazer I recognized because I'd paid for it. I knew the receipt, I knew the exact charge on my card from the men's store at the mall, and gave a toast about how he'd built something real with his consulting business, how he and his fiancée Brooke were going to be just fine because he had connections at 3 different hospital systems who relied on his financial advice. He said the name of the hospital I work at, my hospital. He said it like it was a place he had access to, like he'd been inside the walls of it even once in his life. A piece of bread caught in my throat. I am not exaggerating. I actually had to take a drink of water to get it down, because the absurdity of him invoking my own building as a credential for himself hit me somewhere below the ribs. My mother reached over and squeezed his arm and beamed at the table like a woman who'd finally produced something worth showing off. Then she turned to me and said, in front of Brooke's entire family, maybe Caleb can put in a good word for you somewhere better than the scheduling desk. Wouldn't that be something, having a real career in the family? Everyone laughed. Even Brooke's mother laughed, a woman I'd never met before that night, laughing at a job I didn't actually have, mocking a life she knew nothing about, because my own mother had spent 22 years building the lie for her. I didn't say anything. I have a particular kind of quiet I go to when the alternative is saying something I can't take back. It's the same stillness I use in the OR when a case turns and everyone in the room is waiting to see if I panic. I picked up my water glass, not the wine, because I needed my hands steady, and I smiled, and I said, Caleb's always had a gift for talking to people. Which was true. It just wasn't the compliment anyone in that room thought it was. That night, I started keeping a different kind of record. Not for revenge, not yet. Just for myself. A receipt of every lie dated and quiet. The way you chart a patient's vitals even when nothing looks wrong yet. Because you've learned the body tells you things before the monitor does. The detonator, when it finally came, was smaller than anything that came before it, which is usually how these things go. I was at my mother's house in March, helping her sort through a closet she wanted cleared out before she repainted the guest room, and I found an envelope half buried under a stack of expired coupons in the kitchen trash. Cream-colored cardstock, heavy, the kind hospitals use for exactly one purpose. The return address was the State Medical Board. The name on the front, typed in formal lettering, was Dr. Margaret Voss. My actual full name, the one almost nobody in my family used, because my mother had called me Maggie Girl since I was small, and somewhere along the way that softened into just Maggie, the easy diminutive, the one that didn't sound like a person who held lives in her hands. I pulled the envelope out from under the coffee grounds. Inside was an invitation, embossed gold lettering on the seal, naming me as the recipient of the state's Physician of Distinction Award. Keynote remarks at the annual gala, recognition for surgical excellence and contributions to trauma medicine, the kind of honor maybe a dozen doctors statewide receive in a given year. It had been mailed to my mother's address because that was still listed as my permanent record from residency, a detail I'd never bothered to update because I never expected anything that mattered to be sent there. My mother walked past me into the kitchen, saw what I was holding, and snatched it out of my hand without breaking stride. I threw that out for a reason, she said. It's one of those scam mailers. They print fancy names on the envelope to get people to open junk mail. You think a hospital scheduler is getting invited to some doctor's banquet? She tossed it back toward the trash can. It missed. It landed face up on the linoleum, my actual name and actual title staring up at the ceiling in gold ink 12 inches from her slipper. I didn't pick it back up. I just looked at it on the floor for a long moment, and something inside me that had been bent for 22 years finally, quietly, stopped bending. What made it worse, and I do mean worse, in the specific way only your own family can manage, was that 2 days later my mother announced she and Caleb would both be attending the very same gala. She'd worked a connection through her hairdresser, whose cousin was on the hospital foundation board, and gotten 2 tickets, because Caleb wanted to network with some of the medical money in the room for his consulting business. She told me I'd be coming too, as her +1, to help carry things and make sure she didn't get lost finding the restroom. Wear something plain, she said. Nothing that draws attention. This is Caleb's night. On the night of the gala, I didn't wear scrubs or a white coat. I wore a navy dress I'd had for 3 years and never found an occasion for. I pulled my hair back simply. And I slid my hospital credential badge, the one with my photograph, my full title, and the small gold physician seal embossed in the corner that marks attending level surgical staff, into the inside pocket of my clutch, where my mother would never think to look, because my mother had never once in her life looked closely enough at anything I carried to wonder what was inside it. I rode in the back seat of Caleb's car. My mother sat up front, rehearsing names of board members she'd read off a foundation newsletter, practicing them under her breath like flashcards. Caleb kept checking his reflection in the visor mirror, adjusting a tie clip I was fairly sure I'd also paid for, at some point, in some forgotten Venmo request labeled, "Just need to look sharp for a meeting, pay you back." We pulled up to the hotel's valet circle, and a young event staffer in a black blazer stepped up to check names against the guest list on his tablet. My mother rolled her window down before he even reached the car and started talking before he could ask a single question, rattling off Caleb's name, the foundation board cousin's name, anyone she could think of to establish that we belonged there. The staffer looked past her, into the back seat, at me. "And you, ma'am? Name for the list?" My mother answered for me without missing a beat. "Oh, she's nobody. She's just my daughter. She's with me. Works the front desk over at the hospital. Doesn't even really do anything medical. You can just wave her through." The staffer paused. He held his tablet a little higher and said, politely but firmly, "I do need to check everyone individually, ma'am. Hospital policy on the guest list tonight. Some of our honorees are being announced as a surprise, so we're verifying credentials at the door." I leaned forward and handed him my badge through the gap between the front seats. I watched his eyes move across it. Photo, name, title. The small gold seal in the corner that the hospital only issues to attending physicians and surgical staff with admitting privileges. The one that, on a night like this, also happened to match the credential level of the gala's keynote honoree. His expression didn't change all at once. It changed in stages, like a slow camera focus, pulling something into clarity. He looked at the badge. He looked at me. He looked back down at his tablet, scrolled, and stopped scrolling. "Dr. Voss," he said, and his voice had gone formal in a way it hadn't been 30 seconds earlier. "I'm so sorry. We weren't expecting you to arrive in this vehicle. The foundation has a private entrance reserved for tonight's honorees. I can have someone walk you over right now if that's easier. We didn't want you waiting in valet line with the general guests." My mother let out a short, disbelieving laugh, the kind she uses when she thinks someone else has made a mistake she gets to correct. "Honorees? No. There's been some confusion. She's just my daughter. She does scheduling. She's not one of the doctors being honored tonight." The staffer looked at her, then back at me, clearly unsure whose version of reality he was supposed to trust, until I spoke for the first time since we'd pulled up. "I'm fine waiting with my family for a minute," I said. "Thank you, though." But it was too late for fine. Behind us, a hotel security supervisor who'd been walking the valet line caught sight of the badge over the staffer's shoulder and stopped walking entirely. He was an older man, gray at the temples, the kind of quiet competence in his posture that you only get from 20 years of working rooms where things could go wrong. His eyes found my face and something shifted in them. Recognition, fast and total. "Dr. Voss," he said. "Ma'am, I worked hospital security at Mercy General for 11 years before I came over here. You were the one who came down to the ER bay yourself, 2 in the morning, March of, it had to be 6-7 years ago now. Officer-involved shooting, my nephew was the patient. You didn't wait for the trauma team to assemble, you went in the second the doors opened." He stood up straighter, like the memory itself had put something back in his spine. "He's alive because of what you did in that bay. I never got the chance to thank you properly." The valet circle had gone quiet around us in the particular way a crowd goes quiet when it senses it's witnessing something it doesn't fully understand yet. My mother's hands were still on the wheel. She hadn't put the car in park. Her knuckles had gone the color of bone. In the back seat, Caleb made a sound I'd never heard him make before. A short, airless exhale, like he'd been hit somewhere soft. I opened my own door before anyone could do it for me. I stepped out onto the pavement, smoothed the front of my dress, and looked back through the open window at the 2 people who had spent 22 years explaining to strangers what I wasn't. I didn't say anything cutting. I didn't need to. I said, "I'll see you both inside if you're still planning to come in." And I walked toward the private entrance with the security supervisor at my side, telling me about his nephew's recovery, while behind me my mother sat frozen with the engine still running and her mouth open around words that never came out. If you've ever swallowed your own worth to keep peace with people who never once asked what it cost you, hit that like button right now and tell me in the comments, because what I did with the next 48 hours is going to feel like permission to some of you, and I mean every word of it. The ballroom that night held 400 people, most of them in formal wear, most of them physicians and hospital administrators and donors who'd spent serious money to be there. When my name was called for the keynote, Dr. Margaret Voss, attending trauma surgeon, recipient of this year's Physician of Distinction Award, the applause rose in a wave that started near the stage and rolled backward through the room until it reached the table where my mother and Caleb were seated. In the seats the foundation had quietly upgraded once the staff realized whose family they belonged, which meant they were close enough to the front that I could see both of their faces clearly under the chandelier light. My mother's mascara had already started to run. Caleb sat with his jaw tight enough that I could see the muscle working from the podium. I gave my remarks. I didn't make it about my family. That would have been its own kind of small, using a room full of strangers to settle something private. I talked instead about the particular silence of trauma medicine, the fact that the best work you do is often the work nobody outside the operating room will ever hear about, the patients who go home and never know your name, the families who thank the nurse at the desk because the surgeon already left for the next case. I said that the people who do this work rarely do it for recognition, because recognition was never the point, and that maybe that's also why it's so easy for the people closest to you to assume the work isn't real at all, because you never made them watch you do it. I didn't look at my mother's table again until the very end, and when I did, I said one more thing and let it land soft and final. Being underestimated by strangers is an inconvenience. Being underestimated by your own family is a choice they make every single day, and eventually, it becomes a choice you have to stop letting them make. The room didn't know what to do with that sentence except clap. My mother knew exactly what to do with it. She put her face in her hands. I didn't ride home with them. I called a car of my own, climbed into the back seat alone, and sat in the dark with my phone in my lap, scrolling through 14 years of automatic transfers. Caleb's office membership, my mother's mortgage assistance, the Lexus payment, the credit card I'd quietly been covering the minimum on for 2 years so it wouldn't go to collections and embarrass her at church. 22 recurring transfers in total. I canceled every one of them before the car reached my building. No message attached, no warning. I'd spent 2 decades giving warnings nobody listened to. The fallout arrived in pieces over the next week, the way a structure comes down floor by floor instead of all at once. My mother's card was declined at the grocery store on a Tuesday, in front of the cashier she'd known for years. Caleb's co-working membership lapsed, and the office sent a notice to the building's shared mailbox, which meant Brooke saw it before he could explain it away. Brooke called me herself, 2 days after that, her voice thin and fast with panic, asking if there'd been some kind of misunderstanding with Caleb's business accounts, asking if I could maybe just smooth it over, just this once, for the wedding. "There's nothing to smooth over," I told her gently, because none of this was Brooke's fault, not really. He's been telling you and everyone else a story that isn't true. I'm not the one who needs to fix it. My mother showed up at the hospital 8 days after the gala, not in the lobby this time, but up at the surgical floor, having talked her way past the front desk by claiming a family emergency, which by then had become almost true. She found me in the staff hallway outside the OR suite, still in scrubs, and she didn't open with an apology. She opened with the only language she'd ever fully fluent in. "Your father would be ashamed of you," she said, "humiliating me in front of all those people after everything I sacrificed raising you two on my own." She had her phone out, ready to show me something. A text from Caleb, I assumed, some new crisis I was supposed to absorb. "Are you happy now? Is this what all that school was for, so you could embarrass your own family?" I didn't raise my voice. I've learned that the quietest thing in a room is usually the loudest thing in someone's memory of it. I let the hallway go silent between us for longer than was comfortable, the way I let silence sit in a family meeting when I have to tell someone their loved one didn't make it. Not cruelly, just honestly, giving the truth enough room to actually land. "I'm not embarrassed," I finally said. "I just stopped paying for the right to be erased. Those aren't the same thing, and I think you've always known that." She didn't have an answer for that. She stood there in the hallway in her good coat, in front of nurses who'd started quietly finding reasons to be elsewhere. And for the first time in my whole life, my mother had absolutely nothing rehearsed to say. It would be a tidy ending if I told you she changed overnight. She didn't. It took 6 more weeks and a foreclosure notice on the house she'd refinanced without ever quite explaining to me where the money had gone. Before she called and asked, in a voice I barely recognized, stripped of all its usual performance, if she could come see me. Not for money, just to talk. I went to the old house on a Sunday. The kitchen smelled the way it always had, coffee and dust, but the mantel where Caleb's trophies used to sit was bare. She told me, almost embarrassed, that she'd packed them away months ago and hadn't gotten around to putting anything back up. She'd been cleaning out the garage, she said, trying to figure out what she could sell before the bank came for the house. And she'd found a box of my father's things in the back of a closet, sealed since before he left. Inside, under a layer of dust, was a manila folder. My father had kept every report card I'd ever brought home, every science fair ribbon, including the blue one she'd buried in a kitchen drawer 20 years earlier and that I'd assumed was long gone. He'd kept a newspaper clipping from my medical school white coat ceremony, a tiny mention in the local paper's community section that I didn't even know had run. He'd written a date on the back of it in pencil, nothing else, just the date, like a man marking the day something mattered to him too much to say out loud. My mother held the folder out to me with both hands, the way you'd hand someone something fragile. He used to ask about you, she said, after he left. He'd call sometimes and ask how you were doing in school, and I never told you, because I was angry at him, and I let that anger become something I put on you instead of him. I don't have a good reason. I wish I did. I didn't cry in that kitchen, not right away. I'd spent too many years training myself not to. But something in my chest that had been sealed off for 2 decades cracked open enough to let the truth in, finally all the way, that I had built an entire adult life around earning a love that was never going to be given freely, no matter what I provided, no matter what I sacrificed, because the problem was never my worth. It was that I'd let other people's failure to see it become my responsibility to fix. I let you do it, I told her, and there was no accusation in it anymore, just clarity, the same clarity I use when I'm explaining a hard outcome to a family in a quiet room. I made myself small because it was easier than making you uncomfortable. That's on both of us. Caleb and Brooke's wedding happened that fall, smaller than originally planned, paid for with money that was actually theirs this time. He asked me, awkwardly, in a phone call he clearly hated making, if I'd be willing to come and if I'd maybe say a few words, because Brooke had asked for me specifically. I said yes. At the reception, when it came time, he stood up first, before I did, and told the room, without a single mention of hospital connections or consulting deals, that his sister was the most honest person he knew and that he was only now starting to understand what that had actually cost her. It wasn't a grand gesture. It didn't undo 22 years in one toast. But it was the first true sentence I'd ever heard him say about me in front of other people, and I'll take a true sentence over a trophy on a mantle any day of the week. These days, my mother keeps a photo from the gala on her refrigerator, not Caleb's track trophy, not anything gold-plated, just a small, unremarkable picture of me at a podium in a navy dress, taken by a stranger with a phone. She doesn't say much about it. She doesn't have to. I catch her looking at it sometimes when she thinks I'm not paying attention, the way you look at something you almost lost and are still getting used to having back. I think about that envelope on the kitchen floor more than I probably should, gold ink face up on the linoleum, my real name staring back at a woman who'd spent 2 decades refusing to read it. I think about how long I let people I loved believe a smaller version of me, because the smaller version was easier for them to carry. The truth, the one it took me until I was 42 years old and standing at a podium under hospital chandeliers to finally understand, is that being underestimated by the people who are supposed to know you best isn't a misunderstanding. It's a decision they make, over and over, for as long as you let them keep making it. I stopped letting them make it. That's the whole story, really. Not the badge, not the gala, not the gold seal that finally made a stranger see in 5 seconds what my own mother refused to see in 22 years. Just a woman who finally decided that being quietly extraordinary wasn't worth the cost of being publicly invisible and who walked through a door without waiting to be introduced. If any part of this sounds like your own kitchen table, your own mother, your own quiet erasure, tell me in the comments how you finally stood up and made them see you. I read every single one.